Right now, the same ounce of silver is worth more in Shanghai than it is in New York or London, and the gap is not an accident. That is the whole story in one sentence, and it is the answer to the question in the title. If you own silver, the East is quietly paying up for it, and the West is being talked into handing it over. That is not a rumor, and it is not a theory. It is the plainest signal in this entire market, and almost nobody on the financial channels will sit you down and explain what it means for the metal in your safe. So let me say the answer straight before I prove a word of it. When one part of the world pays a real standing premium over another part of the world for the exact same bar, refined to the same purity, that premium is a message. It is saying the physical metal is scarcer where the buyers are than the paper price admits. And when a buyer as large as China turns from a seller of that metal into a hungry importer of it, drawing it in at a pace the market has rarely seen, you are watching demand quietly overrun supply in real time. The West sells the paper, the East takes delivery of the bar, and I have watched that kind of divergence resolve one way often enough to tell you which side usually wins. Here is the down payment on that claim. One concrete fact you can chew on. For years, China was a net exporter of refined silver. It shipped the stuff out. In this stretch, that flipped. The country became a heavy importer, pulling physical silver in at a record clip, and its home market began trading at a steep premium to the Western price. Then it moved to choke off what leaves. That is a nation looking at the same charts you do and deciding it would rather own the metal than the promise. When the people with the longest time horizon on Earth start behaving that way, you should at least want to know why. I have spent a long time in the gold and silver world, sitting across from people trying to protect what took them 40 years to build. And the single most useful thing I learned is to stop watching the price on the screen and start watching where the actual metal moves. Price can be pushed around in an afternoon by a few large traders leaning on the futures market. The flow of real bars from one vault to another cannot be faked. It costs money to ship silver across an ocean. Nobody does it on a whim. So when the bars are consistently flowing east toward the premium, that tells you more than a week of price ticks ever could. Let me explain the mechanism, because the premium is not magic. There are two silver markets living inside one. There is the paper market, where futures contracts and unallocated claims change hands by the truckload, most of which will never be settled in a single physical ounce. And there is the physical market, the actual refined bars sitting in actual vaults. In normal times, those two markets hold hands, and the prices track. But when real buyers demand real delivery faster than the metal can be moved to them, the physical market pulls away from the paper market. The premium is the seam where they separate. Shanghai paying up is that seam, torn open and left in plain sight. Now here is where it gets strange, and this is the part the fear channels skip. The supply side of silver is the tightest it has been in modern memory, and it has been that way for years, not weeks. The world has run a shortfall between how much silver it uses and how much it digs up and recycles, and it has done so for several years running one after another. Think about what that means. Every year the world reaches into the pile of already mined above-ground silver to cover the gap, and every year that pile gets a little smaller. This is not a forecast. It is arithmetic that has already happened. And you cannot just mine your way out of it, which is the piece that surprises people. Most silver does not come from silver mines. It comes up as a leftover, a byproduct of digging for copper and zinc and lead. So even when the silver price climbs, the world does not suddenly open a wave of new silver mines, because the men who run those pits are chasing copper, not silver. Supply is chained to somebody else's decision. Meanwhile, the demand keeps climbing, because silver is in the guts of the modern economy now, in solar panels and electronics and the electrical spine of everything we are building. And most of it gets used up so thinly spread across a device that it is never worth recovering. Gold gets hoarded and passed down through generations. Silver gets consumed and thrown away. One of those piles is growing, the other is bleeding out. Picture a retired tool and die maker in the Cleveland suburbs. Call him Ray. He spent his working life making the metal parts that made other parts, and he understands physical things the way you understand your own hands. A few years back, he put a slice of his retirement into silver, not to get rich, but because he trusts a thing he can hold more than a number on a brokerage statement. Lately, he has watched the price chop around and stall, and he has heard the smooth voices on television imply that silver is a tired old relic, that the smart move is to sell it and get back into what is going up. Ray is not stupid, but he is being worked on. Because at the very moment the television is coaxing men like Ray to let go, the largest physical buyers on the planet are paying a premium to take exactly what he holds. That is the enemy in this story, and I want to name it plainly. It is not one villain in a room. It is a machine made of large trading desks, financial media that needs you active and anxious, and a paper market where far more silver is bought and sold on screens than could ever be delivered as real bars. That machine does not profit when you calmly hold a hard asset for 20 years. It profits from your churn, from your fear, from talking array in Ohio into selling low so it can be gathered up and shipped to a buyer who understands its value better than the man who sold it. The premium in the East is the receipt for that transaction, printed for anyone willing to read it. Let me pull this back to your own retirement for a moment, because this is exactly the fear peak where I owe you something practical. If you are holding physical silver or gold, and you are watching this tug of war between the paper price and the physical reality, the honest question is how you actually own metal inside the retirement account you have already built without creating a tax mess. And this is the moment to notice the gold to silver ratio, because it has been stretched historically wide. It takes far more ounces of silver to buy a single ounce of gold than the long history of these two metals would suggest is normal. When that ratio is stretched like a rubber band, it has more than once snapped back hard, and silver has done the catching up. There is a tax-advantaged way to actually act on that, and that is what our free Retirement Wealth Protection Guide walks you through. It shows how American retirees move a portion of an existing retirement account into physical gold and silver, without taxes or penalties, inside the account you already have. This is not just for insiders. If you have $100,000 or more in any retirement account, this is for you. If you are watching on your TV, just scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to readfamilyguide.com. From our family to yours, no obligation and nothing to buy. Now, I promised you honesty, and here it is, because you should never trust anyone who only tells you the bright side. A premium in one market over another can narrow. It can be arbitraged away as bars get shipped to chase it. Silver is a smaller, wilder market than gold, and it can fall hard and fast for reasons that have nothing to do with any of these fundamentals. We have seen the paper market slam silver down by a punishing amount in a matter of days, on nothing more than a change in the rules of margin, while not one thing about the actual supply or demand had changed. I cannot tell you the day the physical reality wins over the paper price. I will not insult you by pretending I know the timing. What I can tell you is which direction the real metal is flowing, and it is flowing toward the people paying more. And that is not even the biggest piece of it. The Western vaults that back the paper market are not bottomless. The deliverable silver sitting in the registered part of the exchange warehouses, the metal actually available to satisfy a delivery demand, has been drawn down dramatically from where it stood only a few years ago. When you have a mountain of paper claims sitting on top of a shrinking pool of real, deliverable bars, you have a structure that works perfectly right up until the day too many holders decide they want the physical thing instead of the promise. Most of the time, most holders roll their paper and never ask for delivery. The whole system quietly depends on that. The East asking for delivery is precisely the pressure that structure was not built to handle. Watch what happens when you connect those two facts. On one side, a Western system with a shrinking pile of deliverable metal and an enormous stack of paper claims resting on it. On the other, an Eastern buyer paying a premium to pull physical bars out of that pile and lock them away where they do not come back. Every bar that sails east is a bar that can no longer settle a Western claim. This is not a story about a bad week for the silver price. It is a story about the slow, patient transfer of the real thing from the people who trade its shadow to the people who want to hold its substance. And the premium is the toll booth on that road. Let me put a real number on the demand side, without a price, because it makes the shortage concrete. The reason China needs the physical metal so badly is that silver is not a decoration anymore. It is a working industrial input, and the modern world is starving for it. Every solar panel laid across a field carries a measurable slug of silver in it, and the world is building those by the ocean full. The data centers powering the artificial intelligence boom are hungry for it. The electrical grid we are all being told to rebuild runs on it. That demand does not care about a bad week on the futures screen, and it does not stop to recycle, because the silver in these things is spread so thin it is rarely worth recovering. A nation planning to manufacture the next 30 years understands it needs the metal in hand, not a paper. Claim it might one day be allowed to collect. There is one more piece of arithmetic worth sitting with, and it is the quiet engine under the whole thing. Silver has run up to roughly the same ceiling only a couple of times across the last half-century, decades apart. and it has spent the long years in between building a base far beneath it. Measured against the rising cost of everything, that old high was never truly matched. Meanwhile, it now takes an unusually large number of silver ounces to buy a single ounce of gold, a ratio stretched far past its historical middle. You do not need a fairy tale for silver to close that gap. You only need that rubber band to relax back toward normal, and history says it eventually does. That is not a promise of a price. It is a description of how compressed this spring has become, and who is quietly leaning on it. History has shown us this exact movie, just with different actors, and I have learned to respect the reruns. Think back to the old London arrangement decades ago, when a handful of powerful nations pooled their reserves to hold the price of gold at a fixed level they had all agreed to defend. For a while it worked. The official price said one thing. And then the real demand for the physical metal simply overwhelmed the price they were trying to pin. They spent their reserves trying to hold the line, and in the end, they gave up and let it go. The lesson was not about that specific price. The lesson was that when there is a gap between an official managed price and what people will actually pay to hold the real metal, the real demand wins, and the managers run out of ammunition before the buyers run out of desire. You do not even have to reach that far back to see people learn this the hard way. In more than one country in the last stretch of years, ordinary savers who did everything by the book watched the money in their bank accounts get trapped, frozen, or quietly stripped of its value while the officials assured them everything was fine. A deposit, after all, is just a loan you have made to a bank, and it is only worth what the bank and the currency behind it are worth. The families who had put a little of their savings into metal they physically held were the ones who slept at night. I am not telling you that is coming here. I am telling you that the instinct China is acting on, the instinct to own the bar and not the promise, is the same instinct that has quietly protected careful families through every one of those episodes. Here is the honest empathy, because I know the feeling in your gut. If you own silver right now and every headline seems designed to make you doubt yourself, to make you feel like the fool who is holding a rock while everyone else gets rich in something else, I understand that pressure completely. I have sat with people in exactly that state, good and careful people, second-guessing a sound decision because the noise was relentless. So let me relieve it with a fact instead of a feeling. The people paying the premium in the East are not confused. They are not panicking. They are the largest, most patient buyers in the world, and they are doing the opposite of what the noise is telling you to do. When the loudest voices push you one way and the smartest money moves quietly the other, I have learned whose feet to watch instead of whose mouth. And there is a second layer under all of this, the money itself. Central banks have been buying gold at a pace we had not seen in generations, and they accelerated it after they watched one major nation's official reserves get frozen with the stroke of a pen. That was a lesson every treasury on earth absorbed instantly. Metal you hold in your own vault cannot be frozen by a foreign capital, cannot be inflated away by someone else's printing press, and answers to no political favor. Gold recently even overtook a major world currency to become the second largest reserve asset held by central banks, behind only the dollar. The same logic that pushes a central bank toward gold pushes a rising industrial power like China toward silver, the metal it actually needs to build its future. This is not nostalgia. It is nations quietly relearning what real money is. Now let me get to the recognition, because this is where being early actually matters. The premium in the East is not a secret. It sits there in the data for anyone to see. But the mainstream has not connected it to the metal in a retiree's safe, and it will not until the story is so obvious it is leading every broadcast and every advisor is suddenly recommending what they dismissed for years. By the time the crowd files in and the financial channels finally admit the physical metal is scarce, the easy part of this will be behind us, and the men like Ray who quietly held will simply be sitting on what everyone else is scrambling to buy. Being right is not the same as being early. The whole advantage lives in understanding the flow before it becomes the headline, and right now, it is not yet the headline. So let me give you the practical, honest word on your own position, and then I will let you go. Own the metal, not somebody's paper promise of the metal, because the entire lesson of the premium is the difference between the two. Size what you hold so that no shakeout, no ugly week in the paper price can ever force you to sell at the bottom, because forced selling into a dip is exactly how careful people get separated from good assets. Do not chase, do not panic, and do not let a smooth voice on television talk you into being the seller on the other side of China's buying. This is a case, not a promise. I cannot and will not guarantee you a price, but I can tell you the reasoning is sound and the flow is real. Which brings us all the way back to Ray in Ohio and to you, and to the one thing I most want you to carry out of this. The East is paying more for the very metal the West is being coaxed to sell, and that gap is not noise. It is the market whispering the truth out loud. If you want to understand how to protect and diversify a portion of what you have built, and a portion of what your children and grandchildren will one day inherit, our free Retirement Wealth Protection Guide lays it out in plain language. And for viewers with $100,000 or more in a retirement account who watch to the end and mention this video, we offer a free, one-on-one educational web conference to walk through your own situation. There is no fake deadline here, and I will not manufacture one. The honest why now is simply this. The moment a decision like this is still calm, cheap, and easy to make is exactly the moment nothing feels urgent, and that moment is right now. If you are watching on your TV, scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or computer, go to readfamilyguide.com. From our family to yours. Watch where the metal goes, not where the noise points, and you will already understand what the crowd has not yet figured out.